welcome to my channel. My name is Wisteria Rose, author of the new adult romantic suspense novel, Mythomania. And speaking of Mytho, that is the topic of today's video. I'll be talking about my inspiration for the story and kind of how it came to, end up being the first book I ever published. So, Mytho and me have a bit of an odd history. So for a little bit of background, in case you haven't read it, which you should, Mythomania is a book about a girl who ends up being the love interest of her, the celebrity she really likes and really follows. But he's a yandere, which if you don't know, a yandere is, I'll stick the definition up here, but it's basically a person who has an unhealthy love for someone else that turns into obsession and can get violent or a bunch of other things. And that trope really interests me, and it has interested me since I was about 14 when I first really got into watching anime and stuff. So I remember 14-year-old me stumbled across an anime called Mirai Nikki, or Future Diary, which I definitely was not old enough to watch at the time, but I watched it anyway, and I kind of really liked Yuno's character just because she was so much more interesting than a lot of the other female characters I saw, especially in anime and stuff like that, where everything, well, depending on the genre, but everything can be kind of cutesy and like all the girls are like, really pure and sweet and kind-hearted, which can work really well. But it's just so interesting, and the fact that she was just like, that girl was not okay. She was not anything like that. So ever since then, I thought that trope was interesting, which led me to the place where all writers start. This is a joke. Wattpad or Wattpad, depends on how you want to say it, but I always say it Wattpad. So I started off reading like yandere stories, and honestly thinking about the stuff I used to read was real cringy. It was really, really cringy, but I then started to write my own story. So my very first yandere story I wrote in the 9th grade, and it was trash, and some of the chapters were literally 400 words long, but it still stands to be one of my most read like online things ever, and that makes me die inside a little bit, but it's okay because I'm going to revamp that one and probably publish it later as something that's actually good. But adjustment. So yeah, I started writing yandere, and I started really getting into it and reading it a lot because to me is a more interesting kind of horror sort of trope. So it's not particularly popular. I haven't read any other books that were marketed as specifically like a yandere book or a K-pop book. So me putting them together is interesting. So after I was on Wattpad for a little bit, then I started getting into 9th grade was also the year I started getting into BTS, which if you don't know them, I don't know how you don't know them at this point. Biggest band in the world. BTS is a 7-member K-pop group, and what was I, 14 or 15 when I started to get into them and listen to their music and everything like that. And towards the end of my 9th grade year, I wasn't writing fan fiction for BTS at that point because I thought it was kind of weird, the irony. But that summer, I wrote my very first BTS fan fiction. And then that was 9th grade, then 10th grade. So 10th grade I did a summer program, and when I came back I started posting on Tumblr, which has its ups and downs, but I post a lot on Tumblr, and then I decided I was going to try and write a yandere BTS fan fiction, and I did. And this is she. Well, that was the very first beginning of Mythomania. It was fan fiction, and I'm not ashamed to say it because a lot of great writers start off with fan fiction, or a published author still write it. It's just a way, to connect with other friends and test out different stuff. It's a lot easier to start with because people generally know something about the characters or the environment or anything like that. So it's a good place to start if you just want to get to kind of the plot bits and aren't so worried about the character development. But I had written a few smaller pieces of like shorter stories of fan fiction before, but Mytho just felt different to me. It felt like it had a whole lot more potential to be, something more than just something, more than just fan fiction. So I kind of tested the waters and wanted to see if anyone wanted to like read it as an actual book, as a published and unique, entirely unique work. And there was some interest for it, and I personally thought it had a lot of potential because they were just some of the characters. I was really loving the dynamics. I was loving the plot twists I had and everything. And so I decided to go forward with publishing, which is a whole nother like huge, long, super long process. So I wrote Mythomania. I started it when I was 16, and then I finished it like a week or two before my 18th birthday. So it took me a little over a year to write, and I was writing pretty sporadically. Of course, I still had school and everything like that. And at that point, I was writing mostly for pleasure. So it wasn't like super important for me to have, you know, updates super quickly. But as I decided I wanted to publish it and pursue it, I decided to, you know, post chapters of it, the very first version, the fan fiction version, on a more regular basis. So, but then when I got to a certain point when I was personally editing the story to better fit the narrative and expand the characters and change them into, you know, Jaemin and Isla and who they are, and really make them feel unique and separate from that, separate from just the fan fiction, that's when I started to pull it off of platforms. So it got pulled everywhere off of Wattpad and AO3 and Tumblr. It got pulled entirely, and then I was doing all of the stuff it took to get this published. So yeah, Mythomania started off as a fan fiction, and in the beginning I used to get kind of, I won't say like upset, but a little in my feelings when people be like, oh, isn't that book? Because yes, it is that book. The book that you were reading when it was a fan fiction is now not a fan fiction at all, and is now its entirely unique thing. So it was a little hard for me to accept that others might have a more difficult time viewing it as its own independent thing. But I don't get as many comments about it, you know, now, and a lot of people just read it for, you know, what it is, which I really appreciate. So yeah, Mythomania started off basically as a love child between my enjoyment of the yandere trope and my new obsession with Bangtan Sonyeondan. So yep, that's how it started. There are probably, if you're one of the people who read it in its first stages when it was a fan fiction, there are so many other scenes that I added and characters that I developed and plot holes that I covered up, because there were many a plot hole in the very first draft. But I'm really proud of it. I can definitely say it's a labor of love, and I think that she's about as good as she can be. Of course, there are a few mistakes, but there's always a few mistakes in books I've learned. Even like books that are published by big, huge publishing companies and have a whole team of editors and proofreaders and everything, there are still mistakes sometimes. But yes, this is my debut novel, Mythomania, and this is how I became inspired to write it. So if you have an idea, if you want to write fan fiction, or if you already have a fan fiction you're working on and you think, hey, this could be something, you know, more than just something I post online for free for the internet, I could actually turn this into a book, please do. Please ignore everyone who's going to tell you that you can't, because there were plenty of people who decided, you know, in their brains that I couldn't do it or I shouldn't do it for whatever reason. And of course, people are entitled to their opinions, but a lot of people will be, I don't want to say hateful, but maybe bitter about the whole situation. So if you have an idea that you want to publish, I'd honestly say go for it, because this is something that I've always wanted to do ever since I was a little girl. I loved writing. So I never thought I'd be able to publish my book, you know, when I was 18 in my last year of high school, but I did. And she's pretty thick too. So I have so many more books coming. I think Mytho's the only book. No, that's a lie. One of the ones I will be publishing in the future also started off as a fan fiction, but this is the only one that was ever like had some substance to it. So yes, if you want to start writing or publish your work, you absolutely have the right to do that, because more than anything, your story is the story that you tell, and it is from your own brain. So thank you for watching this video. I hope it was slightly informative and I hope it makes you interested in this story. Please read it and leave a review if you have not. It makes my day. And I will see you guys next time. Bye bye.